Hello, this is Grayson Cox, and working from the Schneider Museum of Art in Ashland, Oregon, in this Artist series. The COVID-19 epidemic has given us time to reconnect and talk over Zoom, and today I am joined by artist Noah Breuer. Noah Breuer is an American artist and printmaker. He holds a BFA in printmaking from Rhode Island School of Design and an MFA from Columbia University. He also earned a graduate research certificate in traditional woodblock printmaking and papermaking from Kyoto Seika University in Japan. Noah has had solo exhibitions at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama, Left Field Gallery in San Luis Obispo, California, Space Gallery in Portland, Maine, Zug House Gallery in Berkeley, California. His artist books have been published by the San Francisco Center for Book Arts, as well as small editions in Brooklyn, New York. He has been included in numerous group shows and galleries and museums. His work is in permanent collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art, Watson Library at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Brooklyn Museum, and the Victoria and Albert Museum, as well as numerous other private collections. Currently, Noah works as an assistant professor at Auburn University. And we have known each other and talked about art and printmaking since sometime around 2008, where we met at Columbia University in New York as Noah was finished with a graduate degree and I was starting. And so the distance from west to east coast doesn't matter because now we have Zoom, and thanks for doing this with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it.
That's great. Yeah. So you're on the East Coast, right?
Yeah. So I'm in Rhode Island, where I've escaped the COVID haze for the summer, and although who knows, it's creeping all around.
It's true. It doesn't care.
That's right. That's right. No, but this is great. We can reconnect and talk about our work and recontextualize it in this time, although I'm not sure we're going to get to that. But yeah, no, it's great to be able to talk shop, and I think we'll probably talk about highly specific print stuff and then much more larger art think about our, as it pertains to my practice, I guess.
Yeah, great. I'm loving this. It's a different form of connection when you can see the work right there on the screen and have it narrated by an artist. It's definitely a treat.
Perfect.
So you have an image up right now.
Yeah, so I'll take it away here, and feel free to cut me off and lob questions at me.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks for inviting me again. Okay, so I'm going to very quickly take you through a few bodies of work, and then we'll get to my current work. But just in maybe a 2-minute summary, I'm going to show you 2 past projects that I think have a lot in common with, at least, if not directly thematically, they have a lot in common with my current body of work in terms of like methodology, in terms of my method. And they end up informing the current work a lot in the methodology of working. So for this one, I'm going back to 2003, 2004, and all of these images are early in the Afghanistan and Iraq war experiment. All of these these are just 9 representative examples of photos that I got from some friends in the military that I went to high school with. And during the time, especially, the end of my college time, and then when I was in Japan for a year, I had this close friend who's in the Marines, did 2 tours in Iraq, and we were doing a lot of emailing with each other and talking about our respective foreign experiences, which were very different, and sharing some photographs. And he ended up sharing, a CD with me of over 1,000 photographs that became this image archive. Was really rich, that I could work from and that I was interested in working from. And, one thing that this project now has in common with the other work I'm going to show is that this is the first time that I was gifted basically an image archive that had resonance, had stuff that I wanted to respond to. And then what it required for me is like, what's the interesting potent protest art. You could make any number of different imagery, but something that I landed on was these photographs that use night vision. And what I ended up doing with this was night vision, for a variety of reasons, was really interesting. I thought it represented this this Rumsfeldian doctrine of this technical, superior technological power that's going to, the claim was that this war is going to be quick and simple, a la 1989 incursion, 1990 incursion in the Persian Gulf War. We're going to use all this, the rhetoric was, we're going to use this superior technology to quickly defeat all the enemy, and we're going to prevail quickly. It also was, that turned out to not be true, but also it was, the total BS reason for invading Iraq after 9/11 was that there was weapons of mass destruction there, and that our technology was going to help us root it out and find it and search for it and then find it. So with those 2 kind of ideas in mind, I used a lot of these images that weren't necessarily originally night vision images, and made these searching soldiers paintings on Mylar. And the Mylar gives you, watercolor on Mylar gives you this like weird drippy, painterly, not totally in focus effect. And it also lends this sort of synthetic lens that I thought reflected the act of like looking through night vision. It also, night vision is great for seeing things in the middle of the dark, in the middle of the night, but it's not so good at depth perception, and everything is very low focal depth. And I thought that was also a great visual metaphor for sort of the lack of planning, lack of exit strategy, lack of deep thinking about what this invasion and incursion was really all about. And, we're still there, and it's sort of a pathetic thing. So I'm just giving you a very brief overlook at this project. I'm going to transition to the second project quickly before we get to project number 3, and we'll spend the most on that. And this is about a different image archive, which is my own personal baseball card collection from when I was a kid growing up in Northern California. And that, of course, is a archive of thousands of baseball cards that, in my view, are about collecting, about trading, about a certain economy. And they're also very much about printmaking in my eyes, as they are CMYK prints made up of dots. So this body of work that I made about, in reference to this image archive of baseball cards, is sort of prints about printmaking. And then there's also built into that a degree of hero worship and reflection about childhood, and some thoughts about like value and collecting, which are a good through line to thinking about like fine art world prints and the commodification of artwork. These are a couple prints that were laser cut to create sort of a jigsaw puzzle. And so they're the exact same jigsaw laser cut puzzle has happened. And then they've been taken apart and switched and put back together. So you have this, Doc Gooden and Tony LaRussa have become exchanged for each other and sort of share the same DNA now. This work certainly references Sigmar Polka and his work about riffing off of the printed image and painting the dots and repainting them and having artwork that is about printmaking and about the process, where this little bit of lint on someone's they got caught in the printer makes it look like this woman on the left has a slug on her back, and then Polka has repainted that entire thing and blown that slug up, and that becomes the focal point of the print. So it's like the dot within the print becomes the epicenter and focal point of the painting. So with that kind of methodology in mind, I re-examined my baseball cards, scanned them, blew them up, painted individual dots, and then also screen printed those back onto baseball cards and collaged them. And what you're looking at here is several layers of not only prints, but actually prints that have been cut out, collaged, and created the illusionary depth, and then also physical depth. There is actually like a drop shadow on the left of paper that's been collaged on each other over and over again. And this is just an example of using the laser cutter to cut out each little floral halftone dot. It's a greatly enlarged dot that's been cut out and creates this like almost like a tarpaulin military net that obscures what's under it. And the end of that project, I was actually making big 2 foot by 2 foot CNC carved pieces of MDF that each one of those were supposed to represent a specific one little tiny fragment of a dot, and then screen printed with some of the original baseball card imagery. So that's a very brief overlook at some past projects. But all of that is in the surface of talking about the current project, which I will now do. So the current project is, which I've been working on for about 4 years now exactly, is all about Carl Breuer and Sona, which is this business that was owned by my family in Europe pre-war. And so this is another image archive that I've mined and examined my feelings about, and involved in making work that references this story of the factory and the company and my family. And so in those ways, it's probably the most deeply personal, but I feel like those experiences of working on those other projects actually informs a lot of the way I work here. So Carl Breuer is my grandfather's grandfather, and he created this business, Carl Breuer and Sona, or Carl Breuer and Sons. They had a factory in the now Czech Republic, and the business center was really in Vienna, but in that time, circa 1900, that's all Austro-Hungary. It's pre-World War I. So photo on the top is letterhead, and photo on the bottom I took in a visit to the factory and its nearby archive of materials in 2016. So I found out that there was this archive that, well, to back up for a second, yeah, my grandparents grew up in Vienna, were involved in this company and other businesses, and fled Austria during the Holocaust because they were Jews in Europe. And I'd never seen any of this stuff until I went to the Czech Republic in 2016. So I found out that there's this place called the Czech Museum, Textile Museum in this town called České Silice in 2014 maybe. And I went in summer 2016, and what they have in this museum are, the mission of that museum is to collect objects and printed material that's about the history of textile production in Bohemia, sort of the region of Czech Republic. And so they have things like this, which are original woodblocks, and they also have archives of materials that were collected at these different regional factories throughout the time of their production. And so I think I've told this to you before, Grayson, like I've been in a lot of print study rooms, but it's a pretty different experience to go into a study room and be presented with boxes of material that already have your last name on them. That's a pretty strange experience. So I got to have that experience. They gave me really great, generous access to these materials. And so this is the image archive that's become the springboard for this project. And I went there with a translator. I took dozens of scans and photographs. What you're looking at here are actually prints on paper that are, you could think of this like a Sears catalog. Like these are prints on paper for tablecloth designs that you can order. And they're different colorways. So on the left side, there's 4 different color combinations of a square tablecloth that actually, that one on the left, I think is super weird, modernist, almost silhouette looking in appearance. And so again, on the left, there's a similar printed on paper piece, but then this one has connected to it a actual fabric sample. So you can see the scale shift of those floral circles. One's on paper and then one's on the actual fabric. So these are sort of commercial swatch books. On the right are actual pen and ink and pencil designs for border patterns. So this is a company that made all sort of domestic textiles, tablecloths, bed linens, drapes, and in this case, cravats or neckties. And so these are like, pick out your color of necktie. And presumably this is the retail kind of experience of picking out your necktie or tablecloth, and then they'll order it up for you. Here's another block print, a very beautiful, I think, block printed piece of linen for, I think this is also a tablecloth. And that's a good indication of scale there on the right. They didn't have very much stuff at this scale, but a few things. So this is, they also had a series of handkerchiefs that I really enjoyed that had all these sort of whimsical patterns or whimsical designs. And these are all branded with different retail names. So this Fisher and Liebermann, that's I think what this is a local business that's called Fisher and Liebermann, and that's an address, Stockmar 98. So these are, the Breuer factory was a wholesaler, and that local retailers could buy and brand their work as their own also. And they exported throughout Europe. So there's things that they made that are in German, and even on this page, there's stuff that is, I think, from Croatia, and also things that are more Slavic and that are in Czech. On the lower right is all Czech. And then, again, this story and the story of my family in Europe all ends with the Holocaust and people being wiped out in the camps or fleeing as refugees to the States. So when I was there, the most chilling thing that I found, that I learned there, was this astonishing irony that once the factory was Aryanized, as all Jewish-owned businesses in Europe were, the factory, because it was a textile factory, was pressed into the war effort. And one of the things that they literally printed at the former Breuer factory was this Yud star badge, which of course is emblematic of Jewish oppression and sort of like a icon of the Holocaust. So that was this like shocking, just totally shocking irony of being at the factory and learning that sort of like adding insult to injury, I guess. So not unlike the moment where my buddy in Iraq gave me all of these images of him at war, when I returned to California with all of these images from my trip to the Czech Textile Museum, I began to sort of think about, well, what is the interesting piece of art to make, and like, what can I say with my art about this, or how can I tell the story, and what it's worth making. So these are some examples of, well, everything will be examples of what I've made since. These are some examples that I think reflect the moment of being in that museum and flipping through the swatch books, seeing multiple different swatches or multiple different colorways at once. And there's a little bit of trompe l'oeil happening here. These are some examples of me being more focused on specific imagery. So these are like specific handkerchiefs that I saw, and rearranging them like cocktail napkins, or like a display of different handkerchiefs. This is from that same series of handkerchiefs, and I would say that this one is this is a more recent screen print that I made last summer. Is more of a direct attempt to tell the story in a little more narrative way, as opposed to just focusing on the image. So it's both the Breuer textile circa 1920 and what was coming out of the factory circa 1941. And so that's maybe the whole story narrative all at once in this photo. This is again like a pretty straight ahead rendition of the pattern, but this is my own remix, if you will, of the pattern, as is my want to make things more complicated in imagery. I would say like this is me projecting my own aesthetic onto some of this imagery and mixing and matching two different Breuer fabric designs on top of each other at once to create some illusionistic depth. This is another example of doing just that. And it became pretty clear pretty quick to me that what I really should be doing if I wanted to make this project that's talking about printed textile design is that I should learn how to print on textiles and not just paper. So these are some early examples of printing on raw silk with wood blocks. And then I should add, because I don't think I said this explicitly about my other projects, I am someone, and I know that you are too, Grayson, who's very interested in like technology, 21st century tools and approaches to art making. And I guess that's my lead in to saying that those blocks were created with by scanning some of the original designs into computer and designing a CNC cut file that for the blocks that then could be inked and printed. And so this is a little digital mock-up of that process. And these are a couple images from UC Davis of those blocks that were CNC carved. I think there's this whole project is mixed in, it's somewhat of a resurrection project, of resurrecting this work that's been lost from my family's company. And I really like the idea that I can kind of reverse engineer the designs from seeing the design, scanning them, recreating the block itself, and then reprinting it. And, if not going back into business, reconstituting some of the labor and the artwork. And this is like part of a through line of working with new tools and digital technology, etc. This is another large woodcut that was also CNC created for the block. And this is a bunch of different media at once. The centerpiece is CNC routed block, but then I've got ink dyeing. This is sort of like me learning how many different processes I can learn at once in one piece. There's fabric dyeing, there's cyanotype, there's screen printing, there's this other UV reactive, meaning like reacting to the sun or light-based dye. And all of these, I'm showing a little bit of source material here again. On the right side, there's this is a CBNS branded line of fabrics called Tatra, which are all sort of a little bit Polish looking, or sort of handicraft looking. And Tatra is this, the Tatra Mountains is a mountain range in Poland. And so on the lower right of that source image are these tassels. And so this is me attempting to recreate a piece of that tassels design. And then there's this border design, which is a Breuer design of hops, which of course an important export in the Czech Republic of elemental form of beer creation. Here's another example of working with that design and creating a much longer and wider repeating tassel, Tatra tassel, as I call it, design motif, repeat. And, again, talking about, since I'm on the subject matter of experimenting in different media and different print processes to create works on fabric, these are all examples of works on cotton that are dyed different colors. The cotton itself is dyed different colors, and then I've exposed each one to a different cyanotype. And the imagery for these cyanotypes, they're all, again, the Breuer factory designs, but I've, in some more than others, given them my own spin and tweaked them and recreated them. And in some cases, the compositions are specific references towards other compositions, like Wiener Werkstätte compositions, or the bottom right will be very recognizable for anyone who looks up the Viennese secessionist posters. So the bottom right is a very specific reference to a Ferdinand Andre secession poster from Vienna, like 19-teens. I also wanted to show this, in showing this, I've had a lot of, I'm lucky to have had some opportunities to show this work, and I've been interested in showing it to think about context of display while I'm showing this work. And so one way of changing the work to be a little more active and less of a passive experience was to create these rubbing tables. So this is a laser engraved piece of plywood that I've created into a table with clipboard clips. And it's been engraved with some of the Breuer factory designs. And then this video is at a show in Berkeley where I invited audience members or visitors to the gallery to collaborate with me and be participants in this work and respond to it. So they're all using these little hockey puck sized crayons. They're rubbing wax. And what's fun is that people get to sort of self-curate. There's color decisions, there's compositional decisions, there's people are somewhat limited by the designs in front of them in terms of what the image can be, but there's a lot of authorship happening. And I really like this idea that while everyone is there making the work, they have a much more literal tactile connection to the work itself. They're thinking about it more. They're noticing details in a way that they wouldn't if they were just visually walking by a print on the wall. And again, I'm just going to use the word authorship again, like the authorship becomes murky. I created this experience, or I'm sort of the author or producer of this experience, but these people are making new artworks. And they're combining, especially in the case right now, like combining this tassel image with a different blue image that's unique to that person. And I like that idea because, it reflects the whole process, the whole process of this project where, I'm making this artwork, but I am not the originator of this work. I'm very much appropriating work that was designed by people in my family or people in the employment of my family, in some cases 100 years ago in Europe. And I like that idea that the authorship has become through appropriation and through resurrection of some of these designs has become murky. It's unclear who's really the author of these works. So these are works that I did not make that came out of a rubbing workshop.
Can I just say something really quickly?
Yeah, please.
It strikes me a little bit like the customer. I mean, like the way that somebody might come into the Breuer and Sons showroom and might pick from swatches and then assemble their own identity through the swatches that were available.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's like an interesting, that's some kind of like retail plus experience, right? Where you get to have some amount of customization. There's something else I was going to say about that. There's the customer experience, and I just think that is absolutely true, what you're saying about the original experience. But then as it applies to a fine art gallery experience, there's also this other proposition at work, which is these works on the wall that I've made and are big and time consuming and in some cases expensive. They're for sale and you can buy them. However, if you choose to take the time to participate and make a wax rubbing, you can have it. So that's a funny value proposition there of,
labor.
The artist. Yes, exactly. So the labor is, I will give this to you, but it will take you 8 to 10 minutes to make, or I will happily sell you this other, fine art work.
Fully authored.
Fully authored, exactly. So I like that as a proposition as well. This is another short video of using a handheld CNC tool to make a design, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit to the more interesting part, which is the rubbing aspect. Just to talk, I think I've already made this point, but the act of making the rubbing, I've just found it to be very meditative and extremely tactile, and I'm searching for synonyms, I guess, but just a more hands-on experience than any print experience. For better or worse, I've spent a lot of time on the computer with this project, reimagining some of these images, and my hand is often pretty removed from the final result in a way that, I used to have a drawing practice that I kind of don't have anymore. And there's the act that I guess it's reflected backwards to this rubbing workshop that I do with other people, that I want them to have that experience too, and share this tactile experience where you're really caressing the surface and you're figuring out what's there, and in a Braille-like way, becoming more literate about what's on the block, right, as you create the image.
You brought up silhouette at the beginning. And I mean, I feel like this is a sort of silhouette moment right here.
Well, especially as it relates to the artist need not make the piece, right? And the artist can design the experience, but need not be present. And actually the work can be made long after the artist is dead, which is clearly the case in this design. I'm the labor. The artist already designed this, or the designer designed it. I may be recontextualizing it in 100 years after it's designed, but totally. This is a quick process shot of some laser engraved wood blocks that became prints on paper in this series. And this was all letterpressed wood blocks that I used to create, printed them and then laser cut them on the left. And then this is the pagination process of getting them all in order to create a 24-page swatch book. So this is this book that the San Francisco Center for the Book helped me publish, and which is a collection of small wood blocks that very much reference the swatch book and the kind of the stuff that I saw in Czech Republic. And then we could talk about this glass work too, but yeah, okay. Maybe I'll I'll tell you about this. This is like the most recent body of work that's from last summer, where I had this great residency at Bullseye Projects, who have different satellite residencies, 4 different ones in the country. So this was in Emeryville, California last summer in the Bay Area. And for obvious reasons, I wanted to make glass that kind of felt and looked like fabric while I was there. And some of the stuff I started doing was highly mathematical and trying to manifest stuff that I had designed on Adobe Illustrator and manifest it in glass form, which involved like cutting glass and cutting curves into glass, which is a real pain, and fusing them together. But what I really, and I like this result, but what I really was taken with was this other form that I found, which also allowed some improvisation into the work, which was screen printing with powdered frit. So like little pieces of colored glass that were almost in like a powdered sugar form, screen printing that onto the glass, and then slumping the glass into in the kiln at 12 or 1300 degrees until it got into a strange wavy fabric shape. So these are some examples of that. These started as flat sheets, and then they're placed over circular surface in the kiln, and then they kind of relax into this wonderful sort of cake-like form. And because both of the source images for the designs of these come from Breuer tablecloths that were meant for circular tables, I thought it would be great to create these tablecloths that were not only tablecloth, but table themselves. And, in this form, they kind of reference this negative space of the table. And I don't know, I think they're a little, if you think about them, they're a little bit ghostly. They're kind of like this spectral shroud over a table that's no longer there. And there's some metaphor happening there that's kind of sad, and maybe about loss, or about covering objects after loss, the way that you cover a body. This is another process shot about, on the upper left, screen printing the powder onto a flat sheet of glass, laying that glass into a kiln, and then after overnight fire, seeing the way the glass is. And then I actually did this one another time to get it even more slumpy. Yeah, there's another one. So I think I have a couple more, but let's leave it at that. And I want to leave time to talk to you about other things that you're thinking, or
I mean, just going back, I'm curious about what it was like to find out that you actually come from printmakers. And, what's that like to sort of, I don't know what your family expected of you growing up, but like, it always feels like you're kind of going out on a limb to become an artist. It's never an easy proposition. There's always supporters, but like, it seems like if you were to go out on this limb as an artist and become an artist and then do all of this work and then find yourself in Europe finding out that you come from printmakers, seems validating.
Yeah, no, I think that it probably is, and it has been. And there's, if you go in for fate, there's some of that happening here, I suppose. I didn't become a printmaking major in college at art school because of this at all. But it was great to go to this. And I'll also say, like, the story of the family and this business is no secret. Like, that's the story of the family. That's not news. The news was that some of this, which was the breaking news circa 2014, was that some of this stuff still existed in Europe. And, people in my family didn't know that. Mm-hmm. And my dad actually found out that, like, oh, maybe there's some stuff in this museum that you should go check out. And, I had high hopes for it, and it ended up being better than I thought in terms of its source material. But I think I went to art school thinking that I'd be a graphic designer. And while I was there, like my freshman year, I took a lithography class, and probably still with graphic design in mind, but really loved lithography and like the multiple and like the egalitarian nature of printmaking, and you could give all the prints to your friends, and it was great. And you trade for stuff. And so, like, I've been on that track, and it certainly hasn't knowingly been affected by this family story at all. But like you say, like, while I was there and I'm looking at all this stuff at the museum, it's like, I had this thought. It's like, oh, well, I kind of know how to make this stuff. Like, I could maybe make some interesting work based on this.
And going back to your method, it's really interesting to me that you, sitting there in that moment, they're showing you swatches, and that that idea of swatches as like potential for print to become something else, an object, for daily life that surrounds people and connects with their formation of their identity, is interesting. And like the idea that it led you sort of ultimately, I mean, not that you're done or whatever, but like to create that swatch book. I feel like that swatch book is such an interesting representation of that experience.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like, you've kind of taken on this role of the remixer, and you talked a little bit about your hand and the whole thing, but you are invested in machines. Do you see a metaphor? Like you've talked a little bit about metaphor, but like, is there a metaphorical aspect to you wanting to use sort of new machines that I would assume they would be using if the business had continued uninterrupted?
Yeah. I mean, there's two interesting things there. Is like, I think that you put your hand on it very clearly, that swatch book is the culmination of some prints that were trying to emulate swatches and trying to emulate the experience and share the experience that I had in the museum with other people. And now that book exists, people can splay it out like a Pantone swatch book and have the experience of discovering them, which I think was very satisfying. But yeah, that business was a business. It was cut short, obviously, but it existed for nearly 50 years. And during that time, they went through the Industrial Revolution. And there's evidence in the work that I saw about methodology changing in terms of printed methodology. So there's, I understand some of it and I don't understand all of it. And that's probably a place for me to research more, because I've been trained as very fine art printmaker person, limited edition, fine art editions, etc. And always that factory was domestic textiles printed for a large audience, wholesale. And so it's all about pushing it out. But yes, there's machine made stuff going on there, especially post 19th Industrial Revolution, like machine made blocks, machine made repeating patterns, offset printing, etc. And I guess you bring up an interesting thing, is like, if it was still a business that printed on fabric, there would certainly be a digital new means of production. And given that the only production now exists in my studio, I'm doing that. I am using new methodologies, and I guess that is a nice additional continuation of the method.
Yeah, I mean, and you're also working as what you called a remixer, and you're allowing your own subjective impulses to come into older designs. And how do you see that as? How do you think about that?
Yeah, like, I've tried to think about not just recreating these things. I think I started with that a little bit. Like, this is just about the image, like especially with the handkerchief designs. Like, this is about this image, and I will recreate that now because I like it. And I can. But bringing some of my own aesthetic decision making and improvisational artist thinking and approach has been, I think, really important, and is also like something that keeps me going and keeps me interested in it. And you and I have had this conversation before about like improvisation as it applies to making or acting or comedy. And I think especially with the glass pieces, they're, or just, if not especially, since we're on this slide, where it pertains to the glass pieces is, that's a really exciting place for me to not have these overly designed outcomes. And so when you have these pieces, for instance, unlike this piece where I'm trying as hard as I can to get back to something that I designed on the computer, these pieces allow for a lot more improvisational, these folds in the quote unquote fabric are sort of like the drips in a painter's painting, right? Like they're the things that you aren't really in control of. And like, this is not a bronze cast of something that I sculpted to look that way. This is something that melted into that shape. And I kind of knew what it was going to look like, but I also, it took a lot of shots on goal to use another metaphor. Like it took a lot of attempts to get this. And I really like that style of making. I like that style of printmaking or painting where you set up the conditions by which you think something might happen, and then you see if that thing happens, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, then you learn from there, right?
Yeah. So, and in terms of like what you're doing as an artist, the other part that I was curious about is like the recontextualization of aesthetics, recontextualization of like a history, and bringing a history in and sort of adding a new history to that. If you were doing nothing, if you were just framing it, you would be, just contextualizing it with like current events and things like that. But you are making decisions within that. So you're sort of like connecting a history, but as an object, you're also making decisions about what it ends up being. So like the swatch book is a small book that speaks to the history of bookmaking as well. And it brings in new ideas about how to bring history into a visual metaphor. These are called tablecloths, but they are glass objects that are about 15 inches in diameter, it looks like, which means it's not actually table size. This is something that you could sit on a desk or a shelf or a table. It's and so like I was just thinking about how this would live, and what that points to as an object.
Yeah, I mean, it may be that I don't entirely know. Certainly there's sort of this alliteration of 3 R's that I often think about with this project, which is like resurrection, reinterpretation, reiteration. Maybe there's 4, and like remix, like there is the remix. I guess reiteration and remix are basically the same. And that's definitely, so those are some of the elements that lead us to this place. One of the things that happens when this resurrection occurs is that the context definitely changes, right? Like these have gone from mass-produced textile, affordable textile for use, not for display in your home, to like fine art, really delicate piece of glass object. And that connotation is super different. And, it's become like, on the one hand, more permanent because it's this like, or hopefully kind of more permanent, is this glass, sturdy, archival material, but it's also become extremely more rarefied and extremely more delicate because it's now this breakable, unique, highfalutin art object, expensive art object. So it's referencing this other thing over here, but it's very much its own thing, and there's some kind of alchemy there, I guess, right? It's turning linen into glass, and there again is some sort of value proposition, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think that, the haunting, you talked about them being haunting, and I mean, I got that right away. And when we've talked before, I've brought that up, and the loss of the thing that actually holds it up, it just being its own thing, it has a power already to talk about that kind of loss. But yeah, I'm just the scale of them is very curious to me, because like I think like transforming the idea of a tablecloth, a functional thing that would be in someone's house, to these smaller sculptures that reference that.
Yeah.
It's asking the viewer to kind of go down a conceptual path. And I was thinking about like people collecting things for their home in a kind of like lower art kind of way, like tchotchkes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This, like, thinking about like placing by scaling it down, you collectibles comes to mind, and that's, to me, kind of exciting, this idea of the collectible, but then it has this like all this meaning under it from the past, and like you can unpack this thing as we are for a long time.
Yeah,
it has a lot of history in these objects, but it breaks down to this small thing that someone could just have on a shelf, which I don't mean to lower it. I mean, to me that's an exciting conceptual aspect of the project.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think scale is especially when it comes to this object, I really wish I could make this at life-size scale. There's like a financial aspect to limitation here, and a like size of the kiln I was working with limitation for this specifically. That is a limitation, and I kind of like the idea of what you're saying is like the shrinkable dollhouse of like that totally changes the context again. Or like the idea that these are kitsch in some way,
right?
And that is like the kitsch made precious.
Yeah.
So there's some of that transformation happening here for sure.
And kitsch also points to a mass production too, right, which I think is exciting to point back towards that in a way. Because I mean, I feel like you could make this with fiberglass, life size, pretty easily, right? But the breakability as a concept is pretty powerful, I think.
Right.
Fragility.
Yeah. And that's where I think these like work the best, I guess, that place that they've become, I mean, I'm just going to reiterate it, like they've become like more stable, but more unstable at the same time. Like they're not going to be used as everyday tablecloths where you spill your food and then like after X amount of years, you probably just throw them away, or they fall apart after a certain amount of time. But on the other hand, like I'm afraid to put these in a crate and ship them to a show because it's hard to ship glass. So they're permanent, but they're impermanent. Maybe they'd be even improved if they did break in transit to a show, because like then you'd have the broken tablecloth, and then you've got a whole other, maybe that's the inevitable actually. Yeah.
Well, they're congratulations. I mean, they're really interesting objects, and coming from where you're coming from, they're exciting to see.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're basically out of time.
I think we did it. I think we did good.
Yeah, so thanks a lot. And
get it through.
I'm really looking forward to talking to you in person someday.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, someday when we get to be in the same room together, that'll be really exciting. Well, thanks so much for including me in this series, Grayson. I really appreciate it. And say hi to the people of Oregon for me.
I will. Yeah. Thanks for doing it. Yeah. We really appreciate you doing this and taking the time.
All right.
So thank you very much. And
Thanks.
I'll speak to you soon.